Barrington Planning Board meeting for Thursday, December 23rd, 2021. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the governor's June 16, 2021 revised order extending remote participation by members in any meeting of a public body, this meeting of the planning board will be conducted by remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with the right or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website. For this meeting, the members of the public who wish to listen to the meeting may do so by following the instructions on the top of the agenda. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. So this meeting is being recorded. Good evening, Malcolm. We'll start with a roll call attendance. So Malcolm?
Here.
Pedro?
Here.
Jeremy? Jeremy, I know you're there.
He's scared. How do you know?
We were just talking to him. Jonathan?
I'm still here.
Brandy, here. Okay. I know Jeremy's there. He doesn't look like he's muted, but this meeting is being recorded. And is there anything? Thank you. Okay, thanks, Jeremy.
Here? Oh, wait.
We do not have any Form A's this morning, right, Chris? Or this afternoon? This morning.
Right.
This
Okay.
evening.
This evening, sorry. It's the kind of day we're having. Minutes of December 9th, 2021. Do we have a motion to approve it as amended?
So moved.
Thank you, Jonathan. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank
Second.
you, Malcolm. Do we have any further discussion on the meeting minutes? Hearing none. Pedro, what's your vote?
Aye.
Malcolm?
Aye.
Jeremy?
Aye. Can you hear me?
Jonathan? We can now.
Now we can.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye. And Brandy, aye. All right, next item is housekeeping item, extending the signing authorization in accordance with MGL Chapter 41, Section 81L to authorize Christopher Rembold, Assistant Town Manager, Director of Planning and Community Development, to certify or endorse on behalf of the Planning Board any plans approved by the board through December 31st of 2022. I am so regretful that we are having to do this, but grateful that this tool is available to us. So
Wait, did you just call Chris a tool?
no, the tool is provided in the MGL.
2 hour limit tonight.
So do we have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Jeremy, for saving us. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Malcolm seconded. All right. Jonathan, how do you vote on that?
Aye.
Jeremy?
Aye.
Malcolm?
Aye.
Pedro?
Aye.
Brandy? Aye. All right, Chris, you have the power for one more year.
I'll need signatures from 3 of you. Brandy, Malcolm, Pedro, you're next door. So this week or next week, I'll get your signatures.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep.
Can I just stop by, or do you want to let us know when we can come by?
I'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay, great. So the meat and potatoes of tonight's meeting is discussion of the short-term rental regulations as continued from our December 9th meeting. Short recap, at that December 9 meeting, we looked at a draft bylaw that was prepared by Select Board member Lee Davis after a joint meeting of the Select Board and the Planning Board. We spent better part of an hour and a half talking about the purpose, and Chris was able to provide us some background information on purpose from an earlier similar bylaw that we had put together. We agreed to leave that meeting and review the bylaw and then come back to this meeting and try and work through either a form of bylaw that we think is something we could further refine, or a decision on whether or not that bylaw has got merit or is even needed for inclusion in our zoning. So I know from the materials that Chris provided to us. Thank you, Chris. We received from Jonathan a modified proposed bylaw that's a little bit of a twist on the approach for regulating short-term rentals. Chris provided us a nice synopsis of what's available in our existing code, as well as some commentary about short-term bylaws that was provided to us on the 29th of November. And then Malcolm, I think we just received through Chris some comments from you about some proposed narrative changes to the bylaw. So is there anything else that anyone had provided that didn't come to this group ahead of the meeting tonight? No? Okay. I had also emailed all of you and you know, in thinking about whether or not we need this bylaw, I had gone off the information that Chris had provided us and then looked at our code just to see what we already have in place, as well as trying to figure out how impactful a short-term rental bylaw would actually be in terms of number of units that it would affect. And I had emailed everyone and asked you to give a little bit of thought around the regulations, the pros and cons of regulating the short-term rentals. I know we have all been receiving a large amount of commentary from property owners and members of the public. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I've gotten a pretty good spectrum of people who are renters and people who own short-term rentals and people who own long-term rentals and people who are in the hotel business. And so there's a lot to chew on there. So I think tonight, if we could just initially open with this discussion around applicability and whether or not we need to regulate short-term rentals in the context of what Chris had provided us around our 7.16 tourist home for transient guest regulation. I'd like to start there and then maybe move into the draft bylaw if we decide that it needs to be, if it needs to be teased out a little bit. Chris, do we want to look at what you provided on 7-16? So are we all familiar with 7-16?
Yes.
No.
So there's just quickly, and you've got this in your email from me. So zoning currently allows by right short-term renting of rooms by resident family as an accessory use. That's under section 3.2.3. That's allowed by right. Resident family, not more than three roomers or board.
Jeremy, you're all pixelated. Can we mute you until your connection gets good? Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so that's kind of the basic framework that we have. So if you're living there, you can rent up to 3 people by right, provided no separate cooking facilities maintained. The next step up is the lodging house, more than 3 rooms, but less than 11 rooms. Lodging house is defined as tourist home. In the use code, it's lodging house. In the use table, it's lodging house. So 3 to 11 rooms. That's by special permit only. And then more than that, it's a hotel. Not allowed in residential zones at all. So, So in residential zones, the max you could do is 11 rooms. The max you can do by right is 3 boarders, and it's a resident family must be offering it. So that seems to preclude the renting of rooms by non-resident families to more than 3 people. That's the existing zoning.
Yeah.
Well, it also seems to preclude renting a house that has a cooking facility.
Correct.
So
Unless it's the tourist home for transient guests. Yeah.
Yeah, border. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
Correct.
renting a room, not an apartment, basically.
Correct. Yep.
So
I have a little pushback on. Go ahead, Mom.
I mean, it seems that by this language and also the building code that, are there any compliant short-term rental properties in Great Barrington?
Well, we wouldn't know.
Yeah,
That's, it's difficult to know who's renting, in my opinion, without some way of locally registering who's renting and understanding where that is and how many people are being rented to and whether that owner is on site at the time. We don't know any of that.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. I think the conclusion I have come to in both, considering our current code and what is defined and what is allowed via that code, as well as looking at the draft short-term rental bylaw, is that we need to have a local registry because there's really no way to enforce it otherwise. And that would just be a threshold condition. I mean, short-term renters technically should already be registering with the state. So it seems to me a very minor additional requirement to register with the town as well.
And it seems, just one more thing, sorry, Pedro. It seems that when the building code changes, there will have to be an inspection and registration regime anyway. And so, again, it's in place with the state, it's coming. A local registration seems like the next logical step.
Pedro, what did you want to add? You wanted to bring a different view?
No, I think I just have some pushback with how we're designating hotels, either with the building code or the bylaw. The building code doesn't really have a definition for hotels, and our bylaw has a clear definition of what a hotel is. So this speaks more to the second part of Chris's commentary. So, our bylaw defines a hotel as a building whose rental rooms are accessed via an interior common corridor where lodging is provided for paying guests with or without public dining facilities. So, unless your house is a shotgun house, right, that has a corridor where you can access all of your bedrooms and that sort of thing, it's not clearly, it's not a clear definition of that. So in this first point that Chris has with the designation of an R1 and an R3, I would argue that the single family home that's being rented is more in line with a lodging house than treating it as a hotel, transient less than 30 days. The transient less than 30 days defines a transient, a person who's there for less than 30 days. How that relates to, the building, the structure that they're renting from, to me is a question. And if you look at I took a brief peek at the 2022 IBC and the use designations in there. And whereas the current code in Massachusetts, which is the 2015 code, does not designate lodging houses as transient, they just give it, I believe it's less than 5 rooms. The 2021 code, which is what the next Massachusetts code is going to be based on, clearly has lodging houses as transient. So again, I would just kick back a little bit with this idea that these short-term rentals can be considered hotels by use.
They're only considered hotels by use under zoning if there are 11 or more rooms.
But the zoning defines hotels here, and clearly, as having 11 or more rooms, sure, but it also has a certain design criteria that it must meet in order to be a hotel.
Yeah, there's a hotel and a motel. Yeah.
I think in terms of that, like, to me, that's a semantics issue that we could address through a modification to either the language of the transient housing section of the bylaw or a clarification in the definition. I mean, it's worth noting. I don't know, Pedro, if we want to get too far ahead of building code. I don't know when, you may have some insight as to when the 2022 IBC is going to be adopted by Massachusetts, but I don't have any insight into that. So I want to be careful not to get too far ahead. I think
The only reason I bring it up, Randy, is because R1 uses do require extensive fire protection and regulation, whereas the R3 does not. It's the only reason I bring it up.
Are you suggesting that the short-term rentals are R3 then?
Yes.
It's quite clear that a short-term rental without somebody on site, it's quite clear that those are classified in building code as a R1.
Not currently. Not under the 2015 code. It's not clear.
That's how our inspection staff interprets it.
Well,
Technically,
I have the same books that they're using. So the next code, which is going to be based on 2021 code, has language in it that is more specific to that effect. Right now, there is no language to that
agreed.
effect.
It's not specific, but that's how it's interpreted technically now.
Could be challenged.
Okay.
It's not as if our inspectional services are inspecting this. We don't know where they are anyway.
Right. No, I think that is an issue, right? That we don't know where these exist, and unless we create a mechanism, and I think honestly, creation of a registry that's not a zoning item. That'd be something we would send back as a recommendation to the select board for a warrant article creating a registry. And if the select board is also taking up the question of an additional tax on short-term rentals that could be dedicated to affordable housing, which was something that we discussed at our joint meeting a couple of weeks ago. Those two things may go hand in hand with one another. But unless we can get to a point where we can understand the magnitude of the number of units that exist, I don't know why we're going through this exercise at this point in time.
I have a question actually about this,
Sure.
the building code, and that is, if someone does a short-term rental and the building gets on fire and people die because there's no sprinkler system, could they sue us because we didn't do the inspections that were required by code?
Again, it depends on how you classify the building. If it's an R3,
Okay, let's just say that it is classified and the inspections are required. Let's say the courts rule that way.
I don't know, Malcolm, that there's anyone on this call that is qualified to answer that question. That is probably a question for town council.
The way it works right now is that it's my non-town council hat that I have on right now.
careful.
It's the paper attorney's hat that I put on. I think the onus is on the operator to seek a certificate of inspection.
Okay.
So and if they seek one and one is granted in some way that, the right boxes weren't checked, I think then there would be possibly a liability issue. But if they're not coming and asking for a certificate of inspection and it's not being granted, the town's not on the hook for sort of not doing a job that it was not required or requested to do.
Well, I had tenants a number of years ago, long-term tenants, and I had to have entirely different homeowners insurance because it was a multifamily property. So I don't know if it's different for if you have short-term rentals, but I imagine, a call to my insurance agent would probably tell me that I need some sort of extra rider if I've got other non-owner occupants in my house.
I could see where the homeowner could be in trouble if they, if they're not according to code, but I was wondering about the town's liability.
I don't think there is.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So Chris, you were going through and you were laying out what we already have in our code, and we got a little bit sidetracked, but I think good discussion.
Yeah, no
So-
problem. I think what we saw, the bylaw that the boards looked at in the joint meeting, and then that we looked at our last planning board meeting on the 9th, drafted originally by Lee, that that kind of regulates short-term rentals by types of occupancy, in terms of whether or not it's the types of residence, in terms of whether it's the primary residence or not. If it's a primary residence, it says you can do it, essentially. Jonathan's draft looks at it. There's a little twist that says that goes more towards zoning. If you comply with zoning and you comply with building code, you can do it. It doesn't make a distinction between second home or not second home. So those are the drafts in front of us.
I see Jeremy's got his hand raised. Jeremy, did you want to add something?
Well, no, it was just more of a question. So am I interpreting it right? So let's say you have a property and you have multiple units. So let's say you have a duplex and a ADU. And so by the current code and zoning, they would have to meet the R1 in order to be rented out as short term.
No, it's not a matter of meeting a use.
Meaning they'd have to be sprinklered in order to be short term. That's my
how
question.
Chris, that's how Chris is saying they're interpreting it. But if it were me, I would challenge it.
I see.
But I think our current code says if you've got a duplex and an ADU and you're using it for transient occupancy, short-term rentals, then you should have a special permit and a site plan review. Right? A special permit issued by the select board. And I don't think anybody's done that.
Unless it's no more than 3 rooms.
No, but I thought
Borders.
because of the separate cooking facilities.
Well, so I think there's a gap actually in our code. There's the borders, because Chris, you just said borders, right? So 3 borders are allowed as an accessory use in a house. But the way the short term or the tourist home for transient guests reads, it's, I believe, 3 rooms. Hold on here.
More than 3 rooms.
More than 3 rooms. So there may be a gap in there of, if you've got a structure that has 1 or 2 rooms. Tourist home, an establishment renting more than 3 and less than 11 rooms on a nightly basis is the definition.
So that's more than 3. So it could have 3 then.
Right.
It could change.
It could have 2.
Yeah, what Brandy's saying is that there may be a reason to change 3.2.3 to say not more than 3 rooms rather than not more than 3 borders. And that's a valid suggestion. That way it brings it in line consistent with, it's more consistent with the way we talk about tourist homes and hotels.
The thing that is, I think, good about our tourist home for transient guests portion of the bylaw is that it does touch upon a lot of the issues that we discussed last time as being important to us insofar as, meeting the requirements of the building code, providing for life safety issues like fire escapes, and having a structure that's in good repair and doesn't have any current violations with the building department, providing for off-street parking, and not allowing outdoor recreational facilities or the serving of alcoholic beverages not included in the original special permit unless modifying your special permit. So, some of those things that we identified as important in the purpose are already addressed in 7.16. And I wonder if we should just be looking at closing any little loopholes or changing the structure of that. I mean, is it too much if you're going to use your property for short-term rental to get a special permit? I don't know. Maybe that's something we want to discuss. Do we want to just get a site plan approval to make sure some of the threshold issues are addressed? I mean, we talk a lot about removing special permit from land use requirements where we feel like it's very onerous. Is this a case where we think that it's important? I think that's part of the discussion we should have. But I think we have the foundation of what is needed for short-term rental regulation already here under 7.16.
And I think the reason that 7.16 includes that language and 3.2.3 does not is that the presumption is if you're an accessory use and it's a resident family, that resident family has, is ensuring that those negative impacts are not occurring. They're more likely to ensure that those things won't occur. They're more likely to say, you're staying in my home, here is the exit. Those sorts of things also, here is where you park. This is where, you put your trash because the people are there and it is their home and they're living there. So the next step up is it's not a resident family. People are there, they're there for a night. There's fire, they're disoriented, they're in a new place, they don't know where to go. So they would need, and this is where the building code comes in, they would need lighted exit signs, sprinklers, etc. And that's why some of the standards are in 7.16 also.
Can I ask a question, Brandy?
Of course.
So, and I tend to agree with what you said about us already having language that can likely be slightly modified to better address this issue. Now, in the first section there, by implication, are we just saying, let's say a single family home that is put on the market for a rental or short-term rent, a transient rental, let's call it, that just the very act of it being advertised as a transient structure is the implication for conversion. In other words, that the bylaw strictly says that a special permit should be granted for conversion of an existing structure. That to me implies some type of building change. But are we just saying that by merely the fact of this house being advertised for non-permanent occupancy, that implies a conversion?
I think that's an excellent, I do understand your question. What is the trigger of use and what is conforming and not conforming, right? At the time that, any modification to this bylaw might be in place. I don't think we clarify that currently. We don't have that clarified currently. And that's probably one of the items that does need to be clarified.
This is all to say, if you use a draft bylaw similar to what Jonathan suggests, which requires conformance with zoning code, the draft you discussed in joint session that originated with Lee does not look at zoning.
It just looks at use.
It just looks at, is it a primary home or a secondary home?
Right. And I spent some time with that, and I imagine you all did as well. And the things I found challenging were the potentials to create conflicts between this new short-term bylaw and what we already have in place. So we are going to get ourselves into a position where we're going to have to go in, really get into, 3.2.3 and 7.16 and figure out if we've got conflicting language. But I think there's a lot of definitions around the use and operation of short-term rentals, and some are seemingly contradictory to others in the bylaw. And so, I if we were going to take up this proposed 7.20, I would want to spend some time going through these different definitions of primary residence, secondary residence, unoccupied, multifamily, shared, because there seem to be some contradictions in there about those properties that I think could lead to some confusion in the implementation phase. But regardless, even if this bylaw were to be taken up and implemented, it doesn't have a mechanism for us to understand which properties are being used for short-term rental. And so I still think we're in a position where this board should probably make a formal recommendation back to the select board about taking up the issue of registering short-term rentals.
That's a motion. I'll second it.
I'll make that a motion. I'm not sure where we are as far as, do we need to, probably in our discussion phase, we need to take public comment, but. Oh, Malcolm, you're muted. I can't hear what you're saying.
I said, let's put that on the list. I agree with that's something we should do. If it's not appropriate to do the motion now, then let's make sure we do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can take up a motion. I can see if anyone in the public, pursuant to our most recently applied, I'm not even sure of local law.
Yeah.
We have to take comment from the public prior to taking any action on any item. So if there's any member of the public that wants to weigh in on what we just discussed about making a recommendation back to the select board to take up the item of a local registry for short-term rentals, please raise your hand and Chris can unmute you and we can hear your comments. I have the attendee list up. It looks like there's 12 or so folks who are attending.
Any hands?
I don't see any hands. So I see one hand. Mr. Londoner.
Unmute. I'm sorry, could you sort of explain to me the motion that you're setting forward, just sort of in plain terms? You guys are throwing a lot of numbers out there as to, 3.3 and 3.2. And so if you could just sort of give me the layman's version of it, be very helpful.
Absolutely. I'll try my best. So let me know if it clarifies for you. So tonight, the purpose of our meeting is to discuss short-term rental bylaw options. Mm-hmm. And we are looking at a number of different options. The motion we're considering right now, though, has nothing to do with draft zoning language. It would be a recommendation from this board, the planning board, to the select board to create a mechanism by which the town could have a registry of short-term rental properties so that we know, who is operating their property as a short-term rental. That's not an action that the planning board can take. It's an action that the select board would need to take and then put on the town meeting warrant. So this is just our recommendation back to the select board.
Okay. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
And what would be the purpose of the registry? Just to sort of quantify how many short-term rentals are out there?
To know which properties are being used for purposes of short-term rentals, yes.
Okay, that would be the only purpose of the registry so far.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I disagree.
You disagree, Jonathan?
Yeah, because part of one of the purposes that was adopted jointly was protection of health and public health and safety.
Yeah.
And if you just have a registry without inspections, then it doesn't do that. But if you make part of the registry an inspection, then that addresses that. And so I think it's not just a registry. I think it's a registry with inspections.
Okay. I think it could take a number of forms once it gets to the select board. I think that's good commentary. I mean, I think we've also talked about whether or not the select board intends to consider an additional impact fee also on short-term rentals. So, any of those items could come up, but though neither of those things would be determined by this board, right? We are just asking the select board to take up the creation of a registry for short-term rentals.
But why?
Jonathan,
did
are you asking us to add and provide for inspection of those short-term rentals?
Yeah, because without that, it doesn't do anything.
I think the biggest challenge in this discussion around short-term rentals has really been trying to quantify exactly what the potential impact of short-term rentals are. And I think we've admitted for, a year and a half or more that we don't know, because there's no means by which to know which properties are being used for purposes of short-term rentals, right?
Well, Brandy, if I may, Chris gave us what I consider to be good information on that.
Which I believe you mined from the state site, right?
I don't know. It's a question for Chris.
That's correct.
Yeah, so, I can throw out these numbers again. There's 3,600 housing units in Great Barrington. 415 of those are second homes. There are roughly 200 short-term rental registrations with Mass Department of Revenue, and approximately 56 of those 200 rentals, short-term rentals, are second homes. So, big picture, out of 3,600 housing units, 200 of those are short-term rentals.
Mm-hmm.
And out of the 200 short-term rentals, a quarter of them roughly are second homeowners.
Right.
So we have 3/4 of those people who are renting on a short-term basis who are residents.
Mm-hmm.
I think that gives us a pretty good idea of what the picture is, the overview of this issue in town.
Yeah, but the question had to do with inspections. And Jonathan, wouldn't the existence of the registry then allow the building inspector to conduct inspections that he can't conduct now? Does he have to be instructed to conduct inspections?
He has to be asked to conduct. He can't just walk up to a property and say, "You're on my registration list. I am here to inspect you."
He has to be asked, and he has to be paid.
Correct.
Okay, so so the select board could ask him to inspect.
What I've seen practically, Malcolm, in some other communities, and I can't remember if there's Berkshire communities that are doing this, but they will randomly select a certain percentage of the short-term rentals for inspection on an annual basis. So, clearly they're not going to get out to 200 units in a year, but maybe they would look at 5% or 10%, and just try and use that as a typical sample size, unless they're getting some sort of call from, a renter or a neighbor about a violation of some sort.
Okay, so so then the recommendation of the select board should, it's not a zone, the inspection is not a zoning issue then, is that right?
Correct.
It's not something that we would include in a zoning bylaw that says the building inspector should inspect 10% of the properties a year or something like that.
No, we would typically just say comply with, so we're giving a performance standard,
So then I agree with Jonathan. We should recommend that the select board consider, registration and inspection.
A registry that would facilitate inspection.
Right, and whatever action needs to be taken to ensure periodic inspections, whatever that is. I like the scheme you just laid out, Brandy, but that's not for us to decide, right?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I'm fine with that. Is everybody else okay with that? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, I would be more inclined to let the building code handle that.
Well, that's what the inspection. That's the basis of the inspection.
I understand.
The building code itself will not cause inspections to happen.
The building code does. First section of the building code is or describes and talks about the activities of the building inspector himself. So he's not responsible, but if we have a register and we know people are using, for example, just to use the terminology, tourist homes in our community, then there is going to be a flag out there that says these things need to be inspected.
And I think the practical reality is, if people are following the requirements to pull building permits for improvements on their houses, the inspectors are going out for that activity anyway. So if I am converting my house to allow for a tourist home, and I'm making any improvement that requires a building permit, then the inspector's going to be there anyway. So I don't know that this is particularly onerous.
Well, it seems to me that a change of use would trigger the building inspector. And if you're going from a single family residence to a tourist home, or whatever you call it, then that would be a change of use.
Yeah, see, this is where, for me, it's a big gray area, because what happens when the owner of that house comes and stays for 2 weeks in the summertime? Does it change use again?
No, that's a good question. I don't know. I think we're going down a rabbit hole now. I almost feel like we should pull out the inspector piece. Like, the point is just to get the registry in place. Maybe secondarily there is a facilitation of inspection. But I think we're trying to put too fine a point on it if we're trying to break out every potential scenario. So I think our initial motion was to recommend to the select board that a local registry be created for short-term rentals. Jonathan's question was whether or not we expand on that and add and include periodic inspections by the building department, or allow for periodic inspections by the building department.
I would say that the recommendation about the inspection is to recommend for the select board to consider inspections, period.
Consideration?
Because it's not our discussion, it's their discussion.
Sure, that's fair.
And I think it's important. I think they should consider it, even if they say forget it. But
not to be too argumentative here, but again, it's not really up to the select board could say you can inspect it all you want, but the building code is going to already tell you, especially if they're going to consider all these things R1 occupancies, they're all going to have to be inspected.
And it's not just the building code, it's the fire code as well.
So maybe will you consider that the recommendation along with the registry be that it conforms to all building code and fire code?
Did you agree to that, Jonathan? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, could you repeat that, Pedro?
I'm just saying that instead of saying in the suggestion to the select board that they consider inspections, that instead they just let the building code handle it. And it looks like they're going towards a heavy inspection of these things anyway. So why would we want to get in the way of that? The building code usually does a pretty good job of keeping people safe. So rather than say, consider a periodic inspection, just say, that registry or whatever would imply a conformance with the building code.
And fire code.
And fire code.
Well, the building code.
The building code is inclusive of the fire code. Yeah. The building code is a series of many.
Yeah, but the fire code has its own requirements for.
I know, but the point, John, is that the building code sends you to the fire code.
That's true. I agree with that. Let's not argue that. That seems like a really fine hair to be splitting. I see one other member of the public has their hand up. Chris, Teresa.
Sure. We'll just ask you to fully identify yourself.
Yes, hi, Teresa's my wife. This is John Sagala. I own a few properties in Great Barrington. They're long-term rentals, and we actually live on the Great Barrington to Marlborough town line in our own house. It's a multifamily. But you're suggesting registering just these short-term rentals or whatever we want to call them. In my experience of renting houses for many years long-term, you would actually be helping the landlord if you were doing the inspections on the long-term rentals. Because in this day and age, it's very difficult for a landlord to get rid of a tenant that's a bad tenant. And if there was someone walking in, and there's more health and safety issues with the long-term tenant that collects things, hoards things. It's overwhelming sometimes, some of these units, because they don't want to pay for a storage unit where they should be storing stuff, and they're storing it in the apartments. Quite frankly, I think you're picking on one group of people by only suggesting that you want to inspect these short-term rentals, which are probably going to be safer than the long-term rentals. And that's all I really want to say for now. But I do probably going to be sending you all a letter in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Segala. Yeah, I mean, we are focused on short-term rentals with this discussion. I'm not disagreeing with your perspective. It's just that right now, long-term rentals are not something under the purview of the planning board. Once a property gets approved as a multifamily unit, for instance, and there are long-term units created, we don't have any enforcement or authority on them. That's something, again, that would be derived out of the building department.
Yeah, I completely get that. See, the problem is people get way too comfortable in these long-term rentals. They're taking out smoke detector batteries and all that kind of stuff because they're comfortable. They're at home, and they're doing stupid stuff. And again, I think you have less safety issues with the short-term rentals when it comes to actually inside the unit.
Thank you. Okay, so we had a motion and a second, and we've had some discussion, and we've had a modification with regard to the motion on the registry for short-term rentals. To how exactly do we want to word this?
Randy?
Yes.
Excuse me. I would say that if you're going to make a modification to the motion that you made, that it needs to be made as another motion to amend your motion.
Or withdraw it and start again.
Or withdraw and start again.
I can withdraw and start again.
Go ahead.
All right,
Start
so
again.
you're going to
Withdraw
withdraw.
the motion. Thank
Brandy,
you, Jim.
before you go there, what I was trying to say, I don't think I did a good job, is that I think by being registered, by registering your short-term rental, by implication, you already have to conform to certain aspects of the building code. So what I was trying to get out of is this idea that the select board should be the decision maker on what gets inspected and what doesn't. Does that make sense?
It
Yeah.
does. You're saying it's implicit in the
Yes.
registry process.
Yes, exactly.
And that goes to Jonathan's point, like it's not just to so that we know how many short-term residences there are and where they are, but it's for the health and safety piece, which this implies, right? So once you've registered, then the building department can act, or once they get the marching orders.
I get a sense Jonathan wants to be explicit instead of implicit so that there's more clarity. Is that right, Jonathan?
Yeah,
I mean,
Jeremy,
sorry.
go ahead, Jonathan.
I would just say, as part of my profession, I go in a lot of houses, and I can't tell you how many houses I've been in where there are beds in rooms with no windows, or beds in basements with no access to egress in any way. So I don't know what short-term rentals look like, but I'm not convinced that they're particularly safe. And so I think that you need, at the very least, to make sure that whoever's doing a short-term rental meets the egress requirements and has working smoke detectors. I mean, it's not terribly complicated. It would take the building inspector 5 minutes to go through the house and check on that. And, you know, it's crazy not to do that, given that we have people's life and safety at risk here.
Yeah, some of the other communities that I looked at that have a registry have like a one-page form that's like the address of the property, and then there's a place for things like, is there a fire extinguisher in the kitchen, and are there working smoke detectors? So, I mean, I think some of that can be addressed in a registration form, for instance. Now, the verification by the building department, I think, is at, you know, kind of next level. Something I think the select board will have to discuss as to how they want to direct staff.
But if you want to sell your house, you can't sell your house without having the fire chief or someone from the fire department come in and inspect and certify that the smoke detectors are working.
Mm-hmm.
That's not checking a box.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not sure where this fits into a motion that.
I just think that we should suggest to the select board that they consider requiring registration and also periodic inspections for short-term rentals.
So then the motion would be, well, so there you go. You made the motion.
I'll second.
Okay, Malcolm seconded it.
Do we have to?
We have a motion and a second. I already withdrew mine. It wasn't voted on.
So we have to open it up to public comment again because it's a new motion.
Well,
Presumably.
Brandy, could you finish your withdrawing your motion, and Pedro can second it so we can take that off?
I withdraw my initial motion. That.
Pedro's got to withdraw a second.
Oh, okay. Do you withdraw your second, Pedro?
I withdraw my second.
Okay. And Jonathan has made a new motion recommending the select board take up the issue of creating a local registry for short-term rentals and include provisions for life safety inspection,
Periodic inspections.
periodic life safety inspection. And Malcolm seconded that. Okay. Motion, second. Discussion, comments from the public. I guess raise your hand, public, if you have any comments about this motion before we take a vote on it. Board members, while we're waiting to see if the public has any comments, is there any further discussion? All right, seeing no comments from the public nor further comments from this board, we'll vote. Jonathan, what's your vote?
Aye.
Jeremy, what's your vote?
Aye.
Malcolm, what's your vote?
Aye.
Pedro, what's your vote?
No.
And I'll vote aye also. And you said no, is that correct, Pedro?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that's a recommendation to the select board. Excellent. Going back to whether or not we continue further discussion on a proposed short-term rental bylaw, or we take up enhancements of 7.16 and maybe some clarification between the tourist home for transient guests section of the code and the residential family accessory use section of the code. I personally would prefer to go the route of modifying our existing code as opposed to trying to bring in something new. Does anyone else have an opinion? Jeremy,
And not doing that and taking up something like what Jonathan proposed?
I think either what Jonathan proposed or what Lee had proposed are elements of which we are already addressing in 7.16.
Yeah, but what I think it's valuable for is that, you know, like, does the public know where to go look if they have what they're thinking as a short-term rental?
That may be a
Right?
good point
And
where
so,
we need to
like,
do.
clearly,
a clarification of the definition that says a tourist home is also known as a short-term rental.
Well, I think this is kind of a decision point, if you will, for the board. There's a zoning route, clarifying your existing code, 716, and other portions of the code, looking at the accessory uses, changing borders to rooms, for example. There's the zoning portion, and then there's something that can operate probably outside of zoning as a more general bylaw, which is in the form that Lee first proposed and Jonathan has suggested an alternative. So do you want to go down the zoning route, or do you want to talk about the other route, which again, there's sort of two other similar routes. Lee's version, which says if you live there, you can do it. If you don't, if it's a second home, you basically can't. That's one way. Jonathan's is not distinguishing on primary or secondary home, but saying you have to follow zoning code and building code. There's sort of related ways to go here, and I think it's an important decision point.
But I think introduction of either of those two options that you just suggested, Chris, creates contradictions with what we already have in zoning that we're going to have to also work through.
Yes.
Which is why I would personally prefer to take some certain elements out of what Jonathan and Lee have presented and reinforce 7.16 tourist homes for transient guests to address any issues we feel are not already adequately addressed.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think that
I kind of disagree that Jonathan hasn't made the distinguish between primary residence and secondary. I mean, he doesn't use the terms, but he's still distinguishing between where the operator is in residence and the operator is not in residence.
Okay.
On I and J, and I like that. I mean, Brandy, I getting back to your question, I mean, can Lee's proposal be passed as a general bylaw?
I think we were officially waiting for some legal counsel advice on that question. As I read through it, there's not a mechanism.
We don't know that. Okay.
Well,
I can't answer that definitively right now. It's going to depend so much on the final.
Right. So, Chris, am I wrong though in saying that there's not a mechanism in in Lee's draft bylaw that brings anyone to the site for a site plan review or a special permit? There's no review mechanism in here.
No.
Right, Jonathan?
Correct. It just says must comply with, it sets out certain standards and must comply with local laws.
So if it's a must comply, then there's no discretion in there that is going to pertain to zoning unless we define, secondary units can only occur in this zone or that zone. And if you're going to have a secondary unit that's going to be offered for short-term rentals, you must have a site plan review. We would need to add that language, Malcolm.
Right.
Can I ask Chris a question, please?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Chris, that Lee's bylaw is written now, is that a zoning document, or could it be a general document?
It might be a general law.
Chris just said that, Pedro, that, it depends on what we do to it. So if we add a provision
but my question is not with it changed. My question is as she presented.
Yeah, and I think she wanted to get a framework together, and she made that pretty clear when she presented it to us at the last meeting, that her objective was to try and get something in front of us to work on. I think it could take either form. The joint committee referred it to the planning board for review, so here we are taking it up.
I'll say this, Pedro, similar laws have been passed by towns in the Commonwealth as a general bylaw.
And approved?
Correct. Approved as a general bylaw as opposed to zoning. In similar form to what these looks like. Registration also would be more of a general bylaw rather than zone.
Well, again, I think, Brandy, I agree with you, but I also, I'm curious to know what the rest of the board members think about the necessity for it.
Nelson, any thoughts?
Pedro, you use the number 57. I think it's 57 as the number of short-term rentals that are owned by non-residents. Is that
Non-primary
right?
residents.
Non-primary,
It's not their primary residence. But you say it like that's a low number, but at the same time, when we talk about affordable housing, when we talk about the effects of 1 or 2 or 10 on affordable housing, that seems like a number that we respond to. So, I don't view 57 as, and I don't know if that's the best number we have based on the numbers that we have. But I don't know that that's a number to shy away from. I do think we need to regulate short-term rentals. If we don't pass anything and we register, then essentially we're prohibiting short-term rentals. That's the way I read our bylaws.
No, we are not, because we have tourist home for transient guests, which is effectively a short-term rental.
Well, it is, but it doesn't conform to any short-term rentals that people are. I would say out of the 200 short-term rentals that we have, very few of them have applied for special permits as tourist homes.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any.
Right, so they're not in compliance.
So can I ask a question of Malcolm? Malcolm, do you think that having a short-term rental bylaw is a housing issue?
I do. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I'm ready to say it.
In what way? How will it help housing?
I think, this is actually interesting because Brandy asked us to write down pros and cons, and I do believe that short-term rental increases housing prices in general. I think it specifically contributes to speculation in the housing market. I think it depresses traditional bed and breakfast and rentals. I think it also contributes to loss of neighbors in neighborhoods. So as a housing issue, I think that the short-term rental definitely, along with other trends that are going on, contribute to increased housing prices in the town.
Based on what information?
Based on my anecdotal evidence, Pedro, of 2 houses in my neighborhood that were modest houses that sold for premium prices to short-term rentals.
Specifically, so the sale criteria was that they would only sell to somebody who was going to rent as a short-term rental. No,
they increased their price because there was demand for short-term rental property.
Okay, you said it. It was demand.
Right.
What happened after that purchase had nothing to do with the sale of that property.
Pedro, you asked me if
short-term
rentals, if I thought short-term rentals was a housing issue. I do believe it's a housing issue. I think it's increasing housing prices in the town, which is moving prices so that they're prohibitive for people.
Again,
because it increases demand.
I want to be careful about blending these issues. By our own numbers, if we were putting in a bylaw that was for short-term rentals and regulation of those rental units for short-term rentals that are only non-primary owners, only affecting non-primary owners, that's 56 units, as Pedro said, which is 1.5% of the housing stock in the town. And I don't think that amounts to a significant issue whatsoever. I think there's been a lot
No,
of,
yeah, we disagree on that, Brandy. I think it's a significant issue. It's part of a bigger issue. Short-term rental is only part of the issue, but I mean, the other part is how many people are coming in and converting. I mean, we've spent years passing regulations to make multifamily housing and ADUs attractive, but are we actually creating more multifamily housing, or are we losing more multifamily housing in this town right now? Are people converting to multifamily housing, or are people actually converting from multifamily housing to single family housing?
I don't
Those
know,
are
but I
market
don't know that I
pressures.
want to tell people that they need to convert or not convert, right?
I'm not,
I think that there are other mechanisms that the town can use. You know, we can get into a whole philosophical discussion, but you know, there are tax incentives that could be put in place to incentivize people keeping units affordable, but those aren't things that are going to fall to this board, right?
no,
So-
they're not. And they are national trends. I mean, there's nothing that we're experiencing in this town that we're seeing in the newspapers every day. Cities and towns across the country are experiencing the same things. And one of the things they can address are the issue of short-term rentals. One of the things we can't address are people converting from multifamily to a single-family home.
Yeah, I'm afraid that the affordable housing short-term rental issue, conflating those two, is a little bit of a red herring, because there's zero guarantee that if we regulate short-term rentals that there's going to be any sort of change in our zero vacancy rate for long-term rentals. There's no way you could guarantee that, or I could guarantee that.
I wouldn't.
Or that it'll have an effect on demand.
It will have an effect on demand.
That's a very dangerous assertion to make on an anecdotal basis. Demand has been high in this town for a long time, continues to be. Right now, for example, there's 50 homes right now that are at least 50 homes, and John can correct me, at least 50 homes that are in the market that are at the sort of median income or above the median income that aren't selling. The reason they're not selling is not necessarily because people can't afford it. It's likely because the properties are not worth the money, because they're old, because we haven't built anymore. So there are different market trends that are occurring here. We've lost multifamily housing in this town from the period that I've been here. We've lost more multifamily housing to this town to the permitting process than to anything else.
Which we
Yeah,
have
which is
tried
another
to
issue.
correct.
Which is another and a
Which we
whole
tried
other
to
issue.
remedy, and yes, I think we recognized
think-
that was a problem.
You know, what we're getting into here is the regulation of a market. And I believe that it's a market that should be made available to everybody.
Well, I happen to believe that the markets are a good thing if they're properly regulated.
Let's I feel like we're a little at an impasse here. Jeremy, what did you have to add? You're muted. You'll have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Gosh. Okay, there we go. And so this just goes to that comment. I keep coming back
Which
to
comment?
it. So I mean, short term. Well, it's the comment of that it opens up to everyone. So short term rentals is a way for someone that doesn't necessarily have the means to create a multifamily property for long-term rental use. So with short-term rentals, because of the amount of money that you can make, it might make it more attractive to people that don't have the money just sitting in the bank to do these things, or don't have the resources to easily get a loan or whatever. Because of how lucrative it can be. And I think just the forces, and my other comment is just the forces are going towards short-term rental anyway, because of all of the negative comments that we keep hearing about bad renters, and the risk of getting a bad renter and getting stuck with a bad renter. And I don't know. I mean, I like Jonathan's approach. But then I wonder about like, you know, just how onerous it is to get to, you know, for sprinkler and egress and all that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, not the easy egress stuff, but yeah.
If a registry is created and there's a requirement therein for conformance with the building code, I think that issue gets resolved.
Yeah, but again, if the building department is going to interpret these things as an R1 use, it's going to eliminate short-term rentals across the town. Nobody's going to install.
The state, right?
Nobody's going to install sprinklers in their house just so that they can rent it on a short-term basis.
No, but they can still run it for 30 days or more.
But wait,
which is again the contradiction. Sorry, Jeremy, which is the sort of contradiction, or you know, that you can rent it for 30 days or more without sprinklers, but if you're renting it for a couple of days or a week, you got to put sprinklers. Doesn't make any sense to me.
I feel like the building code issue is a little bit beyond me personally. I just don't have the familiarity with it, and I feel like we get a little bit lost there. I hear what Jonathan's saying as far as the intent and wanting to make sure that there's provisions for life safety, and I hear what Pedro is saying, that there's a lot of interpretation that can decide which way things might go. But I think that is ultimately going to be left at the building department level, right? Chris,
yeah, and I think we should get back to the point of
Chris
whether or
wants
not.
to stop us.
Yeah, I was going to kind of stop us too by trying to get back on point as to whether or not we feel like we need to do this. Malcolm has expressed himself. I think I've expressed myself.
Yeah,
I feel like if you do decide to move forward, and one of the first things you should be thinking about is, are you going to use the model proposed by Lee, which is very clearly allowing owner-occupied short-term rentals in primary residences. I should say primary residential, and not second home or speculative purchasing and renting by owners who aren't present. So that's one model. Is the planning board in line with that?
So, Chris, how does that then jive with the building code?
Well, I've stated that an owner-occupied home technically would be judged by our inspection services, consistent with state building code interpretation, as a hotel, as what's called an.
And so does that include? Because I mean, this seems to be either rooms in a house where the owner is present while those rooms are rented, or renting out that house for a certain amount of time, which is probably less than 6 months a year. But then what happens under Lee's model when it's a two-family residence or a two-family property or three-family property?
I don't know all the
because it's units. Because it's units, right? I mean, we spend a lot of time, like now town is two-family by right and ADU. So really it's, three for property, which we're trying to encourage. But then, I mean, this isn't doing anything to encourage that. If it's only the one unit that can be used as a short-term rental.
To clarify your question, or to provide a response to your question, Jeremy, the way it is written right now, Lee's bylaw says that the unit offered for short-term rental shall be the operator's primary residence. But as I said, there's some contradictory subsections.
Yeah,
one of which is that a secondary unit on the same tax parcel may be offered at the same time. Yeah. So presumably an ADU on the property or a duplex unit. However, only one unit per parcel shall be offered as a short-term rental. However, then it goes further to say short-term rental of a multifamily property. it says an operator who resides in one of multifamily property shall not offer adjacent unit as a short-term rental, only the operator's primary residence. So let's say you're in a 4-family
Yeah.
building, you could only offer your unit. You couldn't offer any of the other units.
No,
So-
I know. I have a lot
Just
of
to
notes
stop,
on.
I'm sorry to butt in, just to stop. Again, you've talked about the purposes that you think a short-term rental bylaw should be achieving. So with those purposes in mind, where would you fall on renting, allowing renting of second homes for short-term rentals?
I personally don't have a problem with renting short-term rentals to second homeowners. I think we should have a registry process. I think we need to be cognizant of life safety issues, but
So
I-
a registry process, I'm sorry, Brandy, just allow
No,
me
go
to
ahead.
help if I can. A registry process with an inspection regime could address nuisance impacts, ensure compliance with local codes, ensure compliance with health and safety codes. Would that ensure, one of your purposes was ensuring that neighborhoods, or was it neighborhoods, or was it the rental remains residential? That was something that
I think we
that we
changed it
talked
to
about.
protect
Changed-
neighborhoods from undue commercial activity.
Change that, right?
Yeah.
from the commercial activity. So, yeah, again, I think the registration inspection process could help you meet a lot of those things. If you didn't have that, then you might go to the side of saying if you can only do short-term rentals if you live there, because that seems to, and it's not a guarantee, seems to have the impact of, if the owner's on site all the time, that they are ensuring the compliance with those things. Right?
But Chris, if you're saying that, then you're really just talking about renting rooms, right?
Or an adjacent dwelling unit on your same property.
But then that it would have to be sprinklered and all of that, right?
Let's
Well,
set the building code
let's-
issues aside
yeah.
for now. Can we do
Yeah,
that?
Okay.
I feel like we get bogged down in that.
Okay.
Tell me
Um,
about it.
I mean, I think we have to figure out this threshold question of whether or not the short-term rentals need to be regulated from a zoning standpoint. And if so, are we thinking about owner-occupied units or are non-primary owner-occupied units permitted?
I'm with you, Brandy. I don't have a problem with second homeowners renting their places out. We
Me
have this
neither.
tendency to think two things. One, that second homeowners are evil corporations or people that don't care about our communities. Both of which are just, kind of ludicrous, fear-mongering kind of ideas.
I happen to not think that second homeowners are evil in any way, and I don't think they're trying to take advantage of our community. And I do think we should limit the rights of second homeowners to have short-term rentals. So I don't think
Malcolm-
it's not a personal issue with me. It's because I do believe that the issue of short-term rentals is housing. So
Okay, but you're conflating two things there, though, that it doesn't make any sense to me at all. On one hand, you said this is pertaining to affordable housing. On the other hand, we're talking about people that have a non-primary residence that they may want to rent or they may want to occupy themselves from time to time. And I think you have to really divorce the two. I think before you were concerned about the, let's call it the corporate owner of a piece of property that was trying to buy that secondary unit, completely for purposes of just running it as a business. Right? I think
actually, I'm not dealing with personalities at all. I mean, I don't care who it is. I think if you live in a property, the owner and the primary residential owner of the property can rent it out anytime they want. I think a second homeowner who's not a primary resident of the property should, and I would propose that they can rent it out for the number of days that they reside in the property. Or as other towns have done, put a limit of a number of days, 30 or 60 days a year, whereas Jonathan put in his proposal 180 days a year for non-owner occupied properties. And then I think we should also consider grandfathering those who are currently in business. So we're not taking away from those who already have complied to with the regulations that currently exist.
So can I summarize? So if a primary residence, you can rent it out as often as you want.
Mm-hmm.
If not a primary residence, there would be some cap as to number of nights. And in both cases, we would assume there'd be a registration and inspection regime.
That's what I would think. That's actually what I would propose. Is I'm okay with Jonathan's proposal as well. I would add grandfathering the current existing short-term rentals. So as of December 31st, so we don't have.
Except for we don't really know where they are. I mean, I like that idea. I think that's a fair way.
If they want to be
approach it.
grandfathered, they have to register.
I think the problem with grandfathering is that most of these properties have not been through the special permit process, so there would be nothing really to grandfather.
Oh, there is. I mean, the people who are registered with the state.
Yeah, but we have the requirement.
We can grandfather with those people that are registered.
That actually does sound reasonable, Malcolm. If you are already registered with the state as of the date of this, bylaw passing.
But what would you be grandfathering? Continued use, so they wouldn't have to comply with zoning?
Right.
As a short term, I mean, we do that.
Whether it's zoning or a general bylaw. So if they're registered and it's let's say under Malcolm's regime, it's not a primary residence, they would not be limited by the number of nights per year cap. Right, Malcolm?
Right. Right.
Okay,
If they're already registered as of some date that doesn't create a stampede.
The stampede does generate taxes to the town.
Well, only if it's rented.
Only if it's rented. But I mean, I don't know.
But they would still have to.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
But they would still have to comply with the inspection that goes along.
They would.
Malcolm, was that the idea of the grandfathered properties?
Yep. They would still have to. I mean, grandfathering doesn't exempt them from the building code.
So, Jonathan, your bylaw, I did not get any time to really review in detail. Did anyone else get a chance to take a look at Jonathan's markups?
Mm-hmm. The third one you sent was the clean copy, right, Chris?
That was the one that we had talked about without any of Jonathan's. Jonathan sent one that he had redlined and one that was redlined with his changes in it.
Right. Okay. So I'm reading the one that Jonathan has without the red lines because it's easier to read. But
so, Jonathan, you had indicated registration in this bylaw proposal, right?
Yes.
Yep.
And this looks like it would be generally more of a you shall comply type bylaw, so a general bylaw.
I don't know. It'd be nice if it were a general bylaw. The thing about general bylaws is that there's no grandfathering, which there is with zoning. But it's going to be town council's call on that.
Okay, thank you for that insight. That would leave the matter back on our plate if we wanted some sort of provision to allow for grandfathering then.
Yeah, I don't know how you do that.
There would have to be a specific,
There
like
could be
Malcolm was saying, some sort of
a separate
specific
clause.
authorization in the law.
Yeah, I've seen it as a separate standalone clause at the end. You know, these provisions or provisions 1, 2, and 3 do not apply to those properties currently registered or registered as of a certain date with the State Registry of Short-Term Rental Properties. Okay. So we said we would only go until 8 and it's 7:30 and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Should we go ahead, Jeremy?
Oh, no, nothing. No.
Okay.
Actually,
Chris, are you able to share on screen or am I able to share on screen Jonathan's draft language?
Sure.
Pedro, did you get a chance to look at it?
I did.
Malcolm, it sounds like you got a chance to look at it as well.
I did.
Okay. Jeremy, did you get a chance to look at it?
I did.
Okay, great.
This is so this is Jonathan's interpretation of leaves. With not showing any of Jonathan's changes. This is the clean version.
I think you're right down to the third page, though, which is where it gets into the meat.
Yeah, the purposes are the ones we discussed at our last meeting. So
Correct.
Those have been carried forward.
Where do you want me to go?
Right there, above.
So page 3.
Look for the little A. It was on page 3 on mine, but it's not on this.
Oh, okay.
There, up above.
So the proposed 7.2.4A.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay. Operator's primary residence.
Yeah, to me, that's the meat here, starting with A through whatever it is.
So this just says let's see.
I'm not sure. That's
offered as a choice shall be the primary residence or shall be located on a common lot with the operator's primary residence.
So that could be, if it's a 2-family home, a duplex, the operator might live in one side and offer the other one for a rental. If it's a single-family home with an ADU above the garage, they could live, in either one and offer the other one.
Did you have any comments on that one, Malcolm, as you were going through
Yeah, I
it?
like it.
Okay.
I mean, actually, I like the whole thing.
Excellent. You and Jonathan are singing out of the same songbook. It must be
What is
Christmas
it?
time.
Was it something I said?
I'm getting mellow in my old age.
Okay, one party renter, short-term renters, secondary unit is defined as located on the same tax parcel. Parking is on site, events, no events. I only had a question about tents and amplified music being prohibited. Do we want to clarify that as when in use as a short-term rental?
Yeah, I had the same comment about
Yeah,
that.
there's plenty of people that might put a tent up in their driveway for a graduation party or a wedding anniversary or something like that.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a general question?
Yes, Pedro.
What is the difference from an impact-wise? What is the difference between a long-term and a short-term rental? So in other words, why limit the number of guests? Why make people park on site if on-street parking is available? The events thing, as you said, Brandy, we are all in our own homes allowed to have events. And we all have regulations and performance standards in our own bylaw that we have to abide by. So I'm just wondering what makes a short-term renter different
Because you
than a
got
long-term renter or a homeowner.
with a homeowner and a long-term rental, you have to live with the consequences. The short-term renter gets to leave. So, if you piss off your neighbors, and you're a short-term renter, it doesn't matter if you're never coming back. Whereas if you're a long-term renter or a homeowner, you have to live with that.
So the implication is that a short-term rental is more likely to cause more nuisance and the rest of it than a long-term renter or a homeowner?
No, it's just there's less consequences. It's not that they're more likely to do it. It's just there's less consequences for them if they do it. So there's less holding them back from doing it.
I happen to agree with Jeremy on that.
That was well said.
I mean, I want to frame this up in terms of I'm not sure that there's a big enough impact at all to put this in place. But if the group feels that having this language is helpful in, let's call it, if we put a grandfathering clause in, sort of capping the situation where we are presently and not encouraging it to expand except in these terms, I'm open to discussing that. But I do think, Pedro, that Jeremy's right. There is less consequence. You know, if I throw a party, I go and I tell all my neighbors I'm going to throw a party this weekend. I probably invite them, you know, because I don't want to be a nuisance to them. So there's a lot more thought put into it.
Yeah, but if there's on-street parking available in your neighborhood, you don't have to tell anybody, and neither does the short-term renter that they're going to park. They don't have to tell anybody that, and neither does a long-term renter.
Yeah, and I think when you think about it practically, if there's on-street parking, people may park there, and that's not something that's going to be enforced. But by putting it in the bylaw, I think you encourage people to park on site if the parking is available on site.
And there's winter parking bans that people need to know about.
Yeah, I think Pedro, you're thinking about the practical application, and that's not inappropriate. It's just that I think we can say if you're going to have short-term renters, and you're probably going to have, you know, more cars than I would if I was there long-term. You know, if a house is being rented by the grandparents and their adult children and their families are all coming for, you know, a fun holiday weekend, they could have 4, 6, 8 cars as compared to the 2 that a standard family might have.
They could park on street if they want, Pedro. But the short-term rental has to provide enough space for the residents plus the short-term rental.
So, Jonathan, your proposal doesn't allow for non-resident renting. Is that correct?
No, you didn't read it.
Okay.
It says non-primary residence. Rental of rooms and or dwelling units are allowed by right for intervals of 30 days or more.
Which one is that?
Short-term rentals, the first page under definitions. Short-term rentals of less than 30 days may be allowed in residences that are registered with the town and have been inspected on a yearly basis and found to be in compliance with the building code for hotels, motels, and boarding houses, R1. So basically that's going to be prohibitive because I don't think, as lucrative as short-term rentals are, I don't think anyone is going to see it worth putting sprinklers in their house or exit signs or whatever else is in the code. So I think what would happen is that the short-term rentals would just go to 30 days or more for non-primary residents.
Which is, by the way, what happened in New York City. But
Okay.
you're determining, and I understand that you've spoken with Ed May about this, but again, you're determining the use here, the use group.
Yeah, I agree with Pedro that we probably don't want to do that in the code because that may be subject to change as the building code changes. And then you're in a position of always like trying to make an amendment to this anytime there's a building code change.
I don't, am I looking at something different? H on Jonathan's in mine says short-term rentals shall comply with all standards promulgated by the inspector.
if you go up above to section
The definition.
7.2.2,
Huh.
20.2 under definitions.
I skipped that too, Malcolm. That's why I didn't see it.
Okay,
But
I mean,
All
if we
that's
agree
do-
on
all
the
the-
principles.
Randy, all that's doing is just alerting people that if the Commonwealth does adopt the modified IBC this year, then that's what they're up against. This
Mhm.
is not something that we're creating. This
Right.
is something that is statewide, that
Mhm.
is going to be implemented.
Right.
Yeah, but again, the new version clearly has lodging houses as transient. It clearly defines it, so it'll fall under an R3 occupancy. I require a whole different set of design criteria and inspection criteria.
Yeah, I think that's the discussion that Jonathan and Pedro both just had is why I think we should leave it out. You can say building code, leave it as building code. That's
Yes,
fine.
that's exactly
And then-
that's what I would recommend.
And then don't say for hotels, motels, boarding houses, R1 use and occupancy because that
None of
may change.
Mhm.
That'd be my suggestion there. Strike that
Do you leave
last.
do you leave the 30 days in?
Well, yeah, because the building code is going to tell you that anything less than 30 days is transient. So,
Essentially that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really sure you mean the first sentence, but
You think that's redundant, Chris?
I think it's fine.
Okay. All right. So,
Do you- Did,
go ahead, Jeremy.
Randy, I
What's
had
your
a
question?
question under that part of in 7.20.2, the non-primary residences, the
Mhm.
inspection thing, do we want it to say yearly in there? Because as a practical matter, is that going to actually happen, or do we want to just
Well,
say
actually,
on a
that's a
regular
good
basis?
point, Jeremy,
or-
because, well, the building code specifies how often the
Yeah.
inspections have to be.
Yeah. And
So it's
so,
a good point.
We could say periodic instead of yearly.
yeah.
And then depend on the building code to determine how often?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like the double period after operator's primary residence.
I think that's minor stuff we don't need to worry about at the moment.
Is that for
Okay.
emphasis?
It's for emphasis. It's like just a little less than exclamation point.
I mean, we're at 7:40, just to time check.
Yeah.
Without citizen speak, and
Oh, good point.
it
I have
seems
more
as
agendas.
if the board is coalescing around this version. You may have individual edits. Is this something that you want to look at again and work with me on an individual basis to edit and bring back to the board as a group on the 13th?
If we could add a section, after 7.20.5 on, how would we phrase it? I don't know what's the right word for grandfathering, Chris.
Yeah,
But just while you're making notes here, if we could just include
Yeah.
that so that we don't lose sight of it.
yeah.
I don't know if it's an
was,
applicability.
It was, but it was specifically with regards to
Short-term rentals currently registered. Yeah, it might be under applicability. The provisions of this section do not apply to short-term rentals.
And it was only certain provisions that you were talking about. The provisions regarding second homes, right?
Correct.
Right.
And if we're using the right, non-primary residence utilized as short-term rentals.
Right. But we'll figure out what provisions those are. The number of
Okay.
nights.
Okay. Jeremy, are you okay with moving on with this and taking it up the next meeting? That's a thumbs up. Malcolm?
Yes.
Jonathan?
I'm fine with that. When we're done with this, I do have something quick though.
Okay,
Not
hang on.
not related to this.
Yep, we'll get to that in a minute. Pedro?
I suppose.
Okay, me too.
So,
Yes, Chris, can we put this on the agenda for our meeting in January?
yeah. So I will send this out tonight, and I'll need your comments to me by the end of let's say not later than 4 p.m. January 7th. No,
Okay.
that doesn't make sense. by the time I get to my desk at 8 a.m. on Monday, January 10th. So you have the weekend.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. All right, I gotta go back to the agenda. Hang on 1 second while I jump over there. All right, thanks everybody for talking all that through. It's helpful.
In the meantime, I will, you had that motion earlier on the registration inspection. We'll let the select board know about that.
Yeah, do you need me to help you with a letter or anything?
No, I think an email is fine.
Okay, super.
Randy,
Yeah,
before we move on from short-term rentals, can I make a motion to have the select board consider the 3% additional tax for short-term rentals to be applied and used for affordable housing according to the state regulations?
a recommendation to the select board to,
To adopt, or recommendation, or at least to address the 3% that the town can charge short-term rentals to create some funds for affordable housing.
yeah, I think that'd be probably helpful to the select board to know that we would support that. Does anybody want to second that?
Second.
Jeremy seconded? Okay. Do we have any discussion by the board members on this? Hearing none, I'll double check to see if the public has any questions. I see Tony Segala has raised his hand. Chris?
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Yeah, I just had a quick question, and maybe I'm looking at the wrong draft by Jonathan. I see under definitions, it mentions the second non-primary residence, but then you scroll down to requirements for the operation of short-term rentals, and it doesn't mention non-primary residents. Are you saying non-primary residents cannot rent their houses, or they can? Firstly, that's my first question.
Well, at this point, I'm sorry to jump in, Brandy. The question on the table is the motion specifically. And in terms of where
Yes.
the draft bylaw goes, we can talk more about that at the next meeting.
Yeah. So we're working with a very rough draft, Mr. Segala. And I think that's a question we need to just make sure that the language is all consistent. So that'll be part of our process.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so if there's no comments on the question, or excuse me, on the motion pertaining to sending a recommendation to the select board regarding the 3% impact fee that would be dedicated to funding affordable housing. We will take a vote on that matter. Jonathan, what's your vote on that?
Aye.
Jeremy, what's your vote?
Aye.
Malcolm, what's your vote?
Aye.
Pedro, what's your vote?
Aye.
Randy is aye also. All right, so 2 things to send to the select board, Chris.
Got
I
it.
have that email. Okay. Jonathan, you said you had something also along that same line?
Brandy,
No,
don't
it has
we?
nothing,
Oh,
it has nothing to do with short-term rentals.
I don't have anything else on the agenda. I don't have like a board member items of concern or issues to discuss. Is it something that's urgent that we need to take up? And if it's any lengthy discussion, I think if you want to introduce something and then we can talk about it at the next meeting.
Yeah, I just want to introduce it so you can think about it.
Mhm.
I have friends who are considering building an ADU, and I was sort of walking them through it. And it occurred to me that the limitation is 900 gross square feet. And today, we're encouraging people to build more energy efficient houses, to build net zero houses or passive houses. Those walls are a foot thick. And so what I would like to do, or have the board consider, is changing gross square footage to net usable square footage, which we use, and it's already defined in our definitions, and it's used for commercial purposes and all of that. I just think it makes a lot more sense. And also, in addition to the ADU, I would probably make that same change in home occupations.
Okay.
It's not going to be a big number, but we don't want to penalize people for being energy efficient.
Okay. All right. Well, that would be something that would be under like possibly a housekeeping type item.
Yeah, it's an extremely minor change, but
Okay.
it's worth
Yeah.
thinking.
No, we haven't. I don't think we've gotten to a point with Chris yet where we've talked about what housekeeping items need to be dealt with.
On the list.
It's on the list. It's officially on the
Can I-
list now. Okay.
Can I mention one more tiny housekeeping item in the bylaw?
Yes.
It has to do with 7.16, and
Uh-huh.
it has to do with myself over the past week going back and forth between the building code and our bylaw and the whole thing.
Mhm.
Our use regulations has lodging homes and tourist homes.
Mhm.
7.16 only has tourist homes.
Mhm.
Tourist homes is defined, lodging isn't.
Mhm.
But the building code doesn't have tourists, they have lodging.
Mhm.
So I'm hoping that maybe we can think about adding lodging homes to 7.16, just to say lodging homes or tourist homes, and to add it to the definition either of tourist homes or whatever, give it its own thing.
Mhm.
So in other words, it's already in the bylaw, but it only appears in one place in the table of uses. So, and then it's defined in the building code too. So I think having some kind of relationship to the
Some
building code
consistency.
is good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That was among the little holes I thought we needed to plug if we're going to work on 7.16. So thank you. Okay. All right.
Randy?
Yes. Is this related to zoning? It's a good
Jeremy?
thing Chris cut me.
Oh.
Yes. What's up?
So just in the things that we're sending to the select board, are we also, because I couldn't tell from the emails if they're already in receipt of Jonathan's proposal.
I don't think they are yet. It's only been discussed here. I think what we would try and do is refine it and then
And then,
refer
okay.
back to the select board. Yeah, and we may want to do that in terms of having a joint meeting sometime in January. I don't know. I'll need to talk to Chairman Bannon about that.
Okay. I mean, were we supposed to keep them regularly updated in this? And do we want to let them know some? I don't know what the process
I
was.
see
for
Ed and
updating
Steve
them.
are on. They're
Oh, okay.
They're at least listening to us, or maybe
Okay.
they've got us muted. But at this point,
Okay, great. Well, that's fine.
Yes, we certainly don't want to do this in a vacuum. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'll see if there's any citizens speak. Any citizens out there that wish to speak, please raise your hand and Chris will unmute you.
There's 11 of you now out there in the audience.
Okay, seeing no citizens, we'll adjourn at 7:51. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Happy
Good-
holidays.
Merry Christmas.
Good job, Randy. Let's go skiing.
Yes,
Recording stopped.
definitely. Jeremy
Tomorrow-
told us that it's open, right? They've
Yeah, I'll be
always
there
noted
tomorrow morning if anybody wants to go.
I have to do last minute grocery shopping. All
Night,
right.
everybody.
You guys have a nice holiday. Thanks, Chris,
Good night,
very
everybody.
much.
Bye,
Good
Kim.
night.
Bye, all.
Bye, Kim.
Night,
Night, Kim.
Night.
Night, Jonathan.